Welcome to Reformed Thinking. This is the deep dive, where we take a close look at the texts and ideas that have shaped our faith and try to get to the heart of what they mean for us.
Today we're in Genesis chapter 9, looking at just 7 verses from 1 to 7. This is a small section of text, but it's sitting right after the flood, a world-changing, catastrophic event.
And that context is just so critical. Noah and his family are stepping out of the ark into, for all intents and purposes, a brand new world. It's been wiped clean.
Wiped clean. But the problem of human sin, of human depravity, that's still there. It walked off the ark with those 8 people.
Right, so the catastrophe is done, but now civilization has to start over, and the conditions are different, they're harsher, and this is when God speaks. He gives them the ground rules for life moving forward.
And our mission in this deep dive is really to see this passage as a kind of universal charter for all humanity. It sets the rules of the road, you could say, for every nation and every person until the end of this age. It's the core of what we call the Noahic covenant.
We've got a lot of analysis in front of us that frames this not as some temporary rule for one family, but as a standard for all creation. A set of objective truths about life, about justice, and about government.
That's the idea. We're going to see 3 main things today. First, God's original plan for humanity wasn't washed away by the flood. Second, the new freedom to use creation for food comes with a very serious theological string attached.
And third,
Why justice, especially for the taking of a human life, is demanded. Not because it's convenient for society, but because of the incredible dignity of every single person made in God's image.
and all of this, these 7 verses, they're set inside the bigger promise of the Rainbow Covenant. It defines how we live in a world that God is preserving through his common grace, even though it's a world still very much broken by sin. So, let's get into it.
Let's do it.
Okay, to start unpacking this charter, we have to look at how it's framed. What's the very first thing God says to Noah and his family when they step onto dry land?
He gives them the command, and it should sound very familiar. He says, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth."
It's an echo. It's almost a word-for-word repetition of Genesis 1.28, the command to Adam and Eve in the garden.
It is. The sources we're looking at point out that the 3 specific Hebrew verbs, peru, yirabu, umliyu, are the exact same ones used in Genesis 1. This is not an accident.
So why repeat it verbatim? What's the significance of that?
Well, it shows an amazing continuity of purpose. The flood was a massive judgment. It wiped out a wicked world, but it did not cancel God's original design for humanity and for the planet.
He's not starting a new, different kind of project with Noah.
Not at all. He is deliberately laying that same original primary calling on this small group of survivors. The goal is the same: fill the earth with people who bear his image.
So despite this huge, catastrophic reset, the mission hasn't changed. Populate the world and exercise good stewardship over it.
That's it. This was God's moment to change the plan if he wanted to. He could have given them a smaller task, maybe a less risky one, but he doesn't. The repetition is a confirmation that the original mission is still a go.
And it's not just in verse 1. He says it again at the end of this section in verse 7.
He does, and that creates a kind of literary frame or bookends around the whole passage. Verse 1 is the opening statement, and verse 7 is the concluding charge.
Which means that everything in between, all the new rules about what they can eat, about justice, all of it is meant to serve that bigger goal of filling the earth.
It really does function as a frame. It's like a general speaking to his soldiers after a devastating battle. The field is a wreck, the conditions are tough, but he gets on the radio and repeats the original mission orders. It's a way of saying, the objective has not been aborted, the project continues.
There's also a theological order here that's really interesting. It doesn't just launch into the command.
No, you're right. It starts with the blessing. Verse 1 says, "And God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them," the blessing comes before the command.
And that sequence is so important in Reformed thought. God's grace enables our obedience. He gives that capacity first.
He does. He bestows the promise and the ability to fulfill the task, and then he gives the task. So the mandate is a response to God's generosity, not some way to earn his favor. It's not a covenant of works.
And that pattern, that's something we see again and again in the Bible. God's self-gift is always the foundation of the relationship.
Always.
So let's talk about the cultural side of this. If the command is to multiply and fill the earth, that has huge implications for things like marriage and family.
Oh, absolutely. That mandate basically assumes the stability of marriage, of a man and a woman coming together to form a family. Without that, the whole mission to fill the earth just stops. So this isn't just a command about having babies, it's a command about building a certain kind of society.
Oh, and that runs so contrary to a lot of modern thinking, doesn't it? I
Yeah.
mean, where you often hear that increasing the human population is a burden or a threat to the environment.
It's completely countercultural. This passage defines adding more human life to the world not as a problem to be managed, but as a blessing that comes from the Creator's own will. The goal, from the beginning, and reaffirmed here, is to have more image bearers on the planet, not fewer.
And when we say image bearers, we're not just talking about biological life, are we?
No, not at all. The goal is to fill the world with what you could call worshiping, working, culture-making image bearers. This calling includes building cities, creating art, forming governments, making scientific discoveries. The whole broad scope of human culture is wrapped up in that one command.
So the mission is secure. But the world they are now is not Eden. It's a much more dangerous place.
Yeah.
How does God change the rules so that humanity can actually survive and carry out this mission?
That brings us to the middle of the passage, verses 2 through 4, where we see some really key changes to how dominion works.
Okay, so the sources point to three big modifications here. Let's take the first one. The change from harmony to, well, tension in verse 2. God says he will put the fear of you and the dread of you into every animal.
Yeah, this is a huge shift from the Edenic ideal, where it seems like Adam's dominion involved a kind of peaceful cooperation, naming the animals. Now, the relationship is defined by a guarded distance. The animals have an instinct to stay away from humans.
And why was that necessary? Why build fear into the system?
Well, it's actually another act of common grace. It's a protective measure. I mean, think about it. You have 8 people stepping out into a wild world. They're surrounded by animals that could be very dangerous.
They're incredibly vulnerable.
Incredibly. If the animals didn't have a built-in fear of people, humanity could have been wiped out pretty quickly. They could have been subject to constant attack.
So the fear isn't about making humanity feel supreme. It's about basic preservation.
That's it exactly. It keeps the animal world from overwhelming the new Adam, as some have called Noah. It gives Noah and his family the space and the safety they need to actually get on with the mission of multiplying. This new kind of dominion shows that creation itself is now marked by hostility and brokenness.
Okay, so God provides a measure of safety. Then comes the second modification, the change in diet in verse 3. He gives this sweeping permission. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you.
And that is a radical change. In Genesis 1, the diet was vegetarian, green plants. Now, for the first time, there's explicit permission to kill and eat animals for food. This puts the animal kingdom firmly under human dominion for sustenance.
That must have been a massive expansion of freedom for them.
Oh, huge. It completely changes their daily life and their relationship with the world around them. But notice how God frames it. He says, as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything. He's presenting it as a gift, as divine provision. It's not a license for humanity to just go on a rampage.
It's an acknowledgement that life in this post-flood world is harder. Their needs are greater, so God's provision expands to meet that need.
That's a good way to see it.
Yeah.
But this new freedom is immediately limited. And that brings us to the third modification, which is the very strict rule about blood in verse 4. They are not to eat flesh with its life, that is, its blood.
So you can eat meat, but there's a big asterisk.
A very big one. This is the boundary line drawn around their new freedom. The blood, in Hebrew nephesh, is identified here as the symbolic location, the sign of life itself. The language connects life and blood so closely that to eat the blood is, symbolically, to consume the life principle in a way that goes far beyond just getting nutrients.
But why is that so important? If God gave the animal for food, why make such a big deal about this one part of it?
This is the absolute key to understanding the passage. The main reason is to put a hard limit on human dominion. It's a check on our pride, on our tendency toward total autonomy.
How so?
It forces humans to make a distinction. It's okay to take an animal's life for food that's permitted, but it's not okay to view life itself as just another raw resource that you can ingest and own completely.
So it's a constant daily reminder that they are stewards of life, not the ultimate owners of it.
Exactly. To consume the blood would be, in a sense, to claim ownership over the very principle of life, to devour it. This rule stops that arrogance in its tracks. It makes sure that humans always remember that life, even animal life, belongs to God alone.
The analogy of a restrictive covenant on a property deed is really helpful here.
It is. It's like you've been given a beautiful piece of land by a generous owner, God, He says you can live on it, you can farm it, you can eat the produce, that's the meat. But the deed has a very strict clause. You are forbidden from mining the precious metals under the ground. Those belong to the owner. The blood is like those precious metals. It's the life, and it belongs to God.
Which makes it a very practical, ethical check. Every single time they prepare a meal, they have to confront this boundary that God has set.
And that boundary has a huge theological purpose looking forward. By setting blood apart, by treating it with reverence, God is preparing the way for something else.
You mean for the sacrificial system?
Yes, it directly anticipates the law of Moses. In Leviticus 17, we're told that the life of the flesh is in the blood, and God has given it on the altar to make atonement. If life belongs to God, then the sign of that life, the blood, has to be returned to him as an act of reconciliation. You don't just absorb it for yourself.
So even in this very basic rule about how to prepare dinner, God is laying the conceptual groundwork for the entire system of atonement.
He is, and it points even further, all the way to the New Testament. If animal blood, which just represents temporary physical life, has to be treated with such care, think how much more valuable the precious blood of Christ is, the blood that was poured out for the forgiveness of sins. This prohibition steers our minds toward the idea that blood must be set apart for a holy purpose.
So we've laid out the rules for how humanity interacts with the animal world. But now the text shifts and gets much more intense, moving to the topic of human life.
Yes, this is the very center of the Charter, verses 5 and 6. It's where God lays the groundwork for all civil justice for all time. He moves from the general to the most serious command of all.
He starts in verse 5 with some very strong legal language. He says he will require a reckoning for the blood of a human life.
The Hebrew word there, darash, is straight out of the courtroom. It means to seek out, to investigate, to demand a full account. God is basically casting himself as the supreme investigator, the chief coroner, who will personally look into every single case where a human life is taken.
Which means that no human death is ever just an accident in a moral sense. God claims ownership of that life, and he demands an answer for why it was destroyed.
That's the implication of God's sovereignty over life, yes. And notice how comprehensive it is. He demands this accounting from every source, from every beast and from man.
That detail about the beast is striking. Even an animal that kills a person has to be put to death.
It is. And the reason isn't because the animal is morally guilty in the way a person is. It's because the value of the human life that was destroyed is so incredibly high. The death of the animal is a legal statement that a human life, an image bearer, is inviolable, and that its loss must be answered for in the most serious way.
This divine investigation is the starting point for all human law, then.
It has to be. And that phrase, from the hand of every fellow man, also suggests a kind of corporate responsibility. The community has a role to play in seeing that justice is done.
Okay, so a reckoning is required. But what's the reason for it? The text is very specific.
It is, and this is maybe the most crucial point in the whole passage. The reason for this severe penalty laid out in verse 6 is not about social utility. It's not about deterring other criminals. It is explicitly theological. For God made man in his own image.
The Imago Dei. That's the foundation for the sanctity of human life. It moves the whole conversation out of sociology and straight into theology.
It does. It means that every single human being is a visible representative of the Creator on earth. Each person carries the royal seal of the King. And so to murder a person isn't just a crime against that individual, it's an act of high treason against God himself.
It gives the crime a kind of cosmic significance.
Think of it this way. Imagine a king commissions a priceless statue of himself. If you go and vandalize some random block of marble, you might pay a fine for the cost of the material. But if you deface the king's official statue, the penalty isn't based on the price of the marble, it's based on the honor of the king you've insulted. We are those statues.
And that idea establishes the incredible dignity of every human life.
And that dignity is universal. It means every life requires the highest level of protection, regardless of that person's age, from the moment of conception to natural death. It doesn't matter what their abilities are, their race, their social status. If you bear the image of God, your life is sacred.
So how does that square with the penalty itself? If the murderer also bears the image of God, how could the state be authorized to take their life?
That's a great question and a point of tension. The argument from the sources is that the penalty is established precisely because of the value of the image. By destroying an image bearer, the murderer has forfeited their own right to life within the civil order. The act of justice is about vindicating the infinite value of the murdered person's life.
So that brings us to the mechanism for that justice.
Yes. Because God demands this reckoning, he then provides the means for it to be carried out by human agents. This leads right into the principle of retributive justice in verse 6. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed.
This is lex talionis, the law of retribution, an eye for an eye, but at the highest possible level.
Right. And the argument here is all about proportionality. The only truly proportional response to destroying God's image in one person is for the destroyer to forfeit their own life. To punish murder with anything less, a prison sentence, a fine would actually assign a lesser finite value to the victim's life. It would, in effect, cheapen it.
So the punishment isn't just about stopping the criminal. It's about making a statement about the supreme worth of the life that was taken.
That's the idea. The penalty itself upholds the dignity of the victim.
Now let's focus on that second half of the phrase. By man shall his blood be shed. This is where God delegates his authority. What exactly is this authorizing?
This is the moment of delegation. It authorizes human beings, and specifically a formal authority, not just any individual, to act as God's agents in carrying out this penalty. This is not a license for private revenge. That would just lead back to the kind of chaos we saw with Cain and Lamech.
So this is anticipating some kind of organized government.
It's the moral foundation for civil government. You could call this the founding charter of the state. It grants government the power of the sword, the legitimate authority to use lethal force, but that authority is tied directly and exclusively to the task of protecting the citizens who bear God's royal seal.
So the primary God-given job of government is to protect human life and administer justice when it's violated. Everything else, building roads, collecting taxes, is secondary to that.
That's the priority that Genesis 9 sets. The government's authority comes from God, it's limited by God's purpose for it, and it's ultimately accountable to God.
What does that mean for justice system today? If the whole basis is the imago Dei, which every person has equally, how does that restrain the state?
It demands absolute impartiality. Justice can't be based on who you are, how much money you have, or your political connections. Any system that is corrupt, that executes an innocent person, or that values the life of a powerful person over the life of a marginalized person, is completely contradicting the very principle it's supposed to uphold.
Because to apply justice unfairly is to deny the equal dignity of the victim. It's another way of violating the imago Dei.
Precisely. To deny justice to the poor or the weak is, in itself, an attack on the image of God in them. The state is supposed to be a level shield, guarding every image bearer equally. When a justice system fails to do that, it stops being God's agent and becomes a violator of this covenant itself.
So we've looked at the core ethical commands. But let's pull the lens back and see how this charter fits into the wider Noahic covenant that's described in the rest of the chapter.
Right, because this charter doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's part of a much bigger promise God is making to the whole world.
And the sources define that larger covenant primarily as a covenant of preservation. Sometimes it's called the common grace order.
That's right. And we should probably clarify what we mean by common grace. It's not the same as saving grace.
Okay.
Common grace is God's non-saving kindness to all of creation. It's the way he holds back the full effects of sin, the way he maintains the structures of the world, like the seasons, the rain, and allows for good things like art, science, and stable governments to exist, even among people who don't acknowledge him.
I've heard it described as God's hand on the brake pedal. It doesn't fix the engine of the car, which is the sinful human heart, but it keeps humanity from driving the whole world off a cliff immediately.
That's a great analogy. The covenant preserves things. It doesn't transform them. God says later in the story that the human heart is still evil from his youth. So common grace doesn't change our nature. What it does is prevent the world from sliding back into the kind of total violence and chaos that brought on the flood in the first place.
And by doing that, it secures what some theologians call a stable stage. Why is that so important?
It's important because without that stability, the story of redemption couldn't unfold. God needs a stable world with predictable seasons for farming and governments to keep some semblance of order so that his plan of salvation through the covenant of grace can work itself out over thousands of years.
So if the Genesis 9 charter is the security team for a big theater, their job is to keep the lights on and stop fights from breaking out in the audience. They don't write or perform the play, but they make sure the play, the story of redemption, can happen.
That captures the idea perfectly. The Noahic covenant is the scaffolding that holds human history together while God builds his church within it. And it's a universal covenant.
Made with all of humanity and every living creature.
Yes, it shows God's commitment to preserving the world for everyone, believer and unbeliever alike.
And the sign of this huge universal promise is the rainbow.
The rainbow. It's a visible token, a reminder for both God and for us. It reminds God of his promise not to destroy the world by water again. And it's a visible assurance to humanity that the basic order of the world is secure.
It guarantees that seed time and harvest, summer and winter, they will continue. And that stability is the foundation for all of civilization. I mean, without the confidence that the next harvest will probably come, why would anyone bother to plant a field or build a house?
Exactly. That stability is what makes fulfilling the creation mandate, to fill the earth, even possible. The sign is proof that the environment is secure enough for humanity to get on with its work.
So this charter isn't just an ancient text. It establishes standards that are still binding on us today. Let's connect some of these theological points to real-world ethical questions. What about the creation mandate and the value we place on new life?
Well, that command to multiply and fill the earth stands in direct opposition to any philosophy that sees new human life as a net negative, as just a strain on resources. The mandate from God defines new life as a blessing.
And this connects directly to modern debates about the beginning of life.
It does. If the whole point of this charter is to enable the filling of the earth with image bearers, then any practice that intentionally ends a developing human life, like abortion, is seen as a direct assault on the command itself. The mandate to multiply is a challenge to any mindset that devalues life at its earliest and most vulnerable stages.
What about the other end of life? How does the prohibition against shedding blood apply to things like euthanasia or assisted suicide?
The principle is the same. Life belongs to the Creator. The Imago Dei means that a human life has a God-given dignity that can't be set aside, even by the person themselves. Therefore, no one has the right to treat their own life as disposable, and no authority has the right to intentionally end a life to relieve suffering. It's still seen as shedding blood, as violating the trust God has given us as stewards, not owners, of our lives.
Okay, let's talk about civil engagement. Verse 6 authorizes the state to protect the Imago Dei. How does that shape how we should think about government today?
Well, the idea of common grace and this delegated authority, which is later affirmed in Romans 13, it really calls us to be thoughtfully engaged in the public square. The state is accountable to God. And because its God-given job is to protect the image of God in people, we have a responsibility to call our governments to live up to that standard.
So the Imago Dei becomes a kind of test for public policy, especially when it comes to systemic injustice.
Absolutely. Because the Imago Dei is universal, it condemns any system that favors one group of people over another. If we're talking about something like criminal justice reform, the question isn't just about punishment. It's about whether the system treats every person, including the person in prison, as someone who still bears the image of God.
And if that system is corrupt, if it favors the rich or is racially biased, it's failing its core mission.
It's failing in a spectacular way. A corrupt justice system is a denial of God's sovereign claim over human life. This mandate requires governments to be accountable and just. And we can apply that to other issues too, like caring for refugees or ensuring economic justice. The question is always, are our policies respecting the God-given dignity of these fellow image bearers?
So the charter becomes a powerful tool for judging whether a society is truly flourishing. It's not just about the powerful, but about how it protects the most vulnerable.
That's the ultimate test. If a society consistently mistreats the weak and the marginalized, it is acting against the very charter that gives it moral legitimacy in the first place.
And that changes how we can talk about these things in public. We're not just arguing for a sectarian religious law. We're appealing to a universal creational standard that all people are bound by, whether they recognize it or not.
That's right. It gives us a common ground for ethical debate. We can point to the inherent dignity of the human person as an objective reality, not just a preference or a social construct. The Imago Dei gives human rights a real and solid basis.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive on Genesis 9.1 to 7, the Noahic Charter for Life and Justice. We started with the bookends, the creation mandate, which shows God's unchanging purpose for humanity.
Then we looked at the new rules for dominion, the fear in animals for protection, the permission to eat meat for sustenance, and that crucial prohibition on blood, which reminds us that life is a trust from God, not our absolute possession.
And we anchored the whole thing in the supreme value of the human person made in God's image. That value is what demands a divine reckoning for murder and what requires the establishment of civil government to administer justice.
It's the charter that forbids us from treating life as trivial. It establishes the moral basis for the state, and it defines the framework for all human history between the fall and the return of Christ.
The world described in this Noahic covenant, this preserved but still broken world, it really does point to something beyond itself. It's the stage that God is securing.
It's secured until the day when the sanctity of life, which is established here in Genesis 9, is finally and perfectly realized in the new creation. And that new creation is made possible by the saving work of Christ's blood, the very thing that the prohibition on consuming animal blood was pointing toward all along, the life that was poured out to truly cleanse the world.
A really helpful framework for understanding how God preserves the world in hope. We hope you'll think more about how these themes of covenant, justice, and the dignity of human life can shape your own engagement with the world today.